Chapter 21, Falco. "Happy anniversary!" they shouted while I blew out the candles. It was April 8th, 2017, exactly 1 year after my stroke. Remco, the children, and I had just finished a wonderful dinner at the Duchess in Amsterdam. Afterward, we ate cake at Karen's beautiful apartment. As I mentioned before, Karen had been a big-shot lawyer who decided to change her life drastically after she experienced burnout. Remco's cousin Lauren, Karen's daughter, owned the best cake bakery in town. Always made to order, no two cakes were ever identical. Our special cake was round, about 40 centimeters high, champagne-colored, topped with flowers, and it read, "Stroke Survivor, 1 year." It was a masterpiece that smelled flowery and fruity and tasted delicious. Madeline had drawn a picture for me. It said, "Mama, I love you. You are so sweet." Seeing her drawing made me laugh, but I also had tears in my eyes. Remco said, "It was a heck of a year, but I'm glad it's over. I figured out a nice gift for you, but you'll have to be patient. You'll get your anniversary present in a few weeks," he continued. I posted my 1-year post-stroke story on Facebook and Instagram. What can I say? It was a great anniversary. I put Remco's gift out of my mind for several weeks. Then he came home one evening and said with a smile, "Your anniversary present is outside." Really? What did he get me, I wondered. A new bike, perhaps? I went out and there it was. Posh gray, not too big, and aerodynamically curved. It was love at first sight. Since the roof was down, I could see the luxurious black leather upholstery inside. "It's a BMW 228i convertible," Remco said. I was stunned. Gasping for air, when I could finally say a few words, what came out was, "Thank you, but I'm not sure I remember how to drive again." "It has an automatic transmission. You've come a long way, and in no time, you'll learn how to drive again," Remco said. "I bought it from a BMW dealer in the south of Germany. It was their showroom model, so it looks new, but it's not new. I ended up getting an excellent deal on it." Remco was a natural deal maker. He was patient, did his research, and negotiated effectively. He didn't get emotional and always managed to point out something to the seller, no matter how small, that might be his deal breaker. "What is the lowest price you want to sell this car for?" he would ask. Then he negotiated on that price. Opening the door, I sat down in the driver's seat. The dashboard odometer read 24,018 kilometers. Remco got in the passenger seat and said with a grin, "Let's go for a ride then." After pushing the start button, I used my right hand to pick up my left hand and placed it on the steering wheel. And off we went. I was scared at first since I hadn't driven for more than a year. We drove around a large, empty parking lot, and I soon got the hang of it. Then we drove very slowly on the small, quiet roads in the village where we lived. Within 1 month, I was driving on less busy, smaller roads anywhere, but I still needed to be extra cautious since I had no sight in my right eye. I loved driving that car. It was the best gift Remco could have given me at the time. I had fully begun to realize that I lost most of my independence due to my stroke. Now, 1 year post-stroke, it had slowly become more of an issue. For the first time since my stroke, I felt independent again because I had the freedom to drive my own car. Anyone who has survived a stroke will understand how important that self-reliance and liberty was to me. I thought of Jerome, my new friend from Clemendal who had suffered a severe head injury after his bike was hit by a car. Jerome loved cars, and it was his dream to drive a Porsche 911 again. I should get a hold of him in a few years to see if he managed to get his new driving license. Dutch driving rules required you to take a new test after a stroke. For me, German regulations applied, and my doctor had permitted me to resume driving. I was so happy with that beautiful car and the freedom it gave me, especially in good weather when I could drive with the top down. It felt like a safe haven and private space, somewhere I could turn my Spotify playlist up to the highest volume and listen to the Rolling Stones, Talk Talk, and a bunch of SoundCloud songs in my phone, like the Autograph remix of Marvin Gaye's Grapevine, and a song by Austrian artist Falco called Genie. The unappealing aspect of the song is the premise. It's the story of a maniac who kidnaps young girls. However, the moment after the news flashed about a missing girl, Falco sings the most powerful la or ah sound I've ever heard. Singing along as loudly as I could gave me goosebumps every time. My remaining anger began to melt away during these bursts of sound as I blurted out the desperate la la as if my life depended on it. If I think about it from a psychological standpoint, it's highly unlikely that I identified with the missing girl Falco is singing about. Genie, quit living on dreams. Genie, life is not what it seems. Such a lonely little girl in a cold, cold world. And then, in the German version, Sie kommen dich zu hören. Sie werden dich nicht finden. I found myself reliving my anguished sense of helplessness when the hospital's neurologist kept me waiting for 5.5 hours after my stroke, before Remco screamed at them to take action. Back then, I couldn't make a sound, but never mind, that was in the past now. Besides, I had that genie girl to hang on to if I began to re-experience tough moments. During the spring and summer of 2017, we took 2 trips. One to Ibiza for a week, then later to New England for 2 weeks. When I think back on it, I have mixed feelings about those trips. I do love Ibiza. It feels very familiar. I've been there at least 20 times, and it's where I met my husband Remco. The first few days were pleasant, staying in a hotel with Madeline and Martin, feeling relaxed and comfortable around my family. Then, during the second half of the week, we were invited to a large birthday party, and that's when things began to go downhill. Remco's Uncle Paul was going to celebrate turning 70 years old with a 3-day party in his villa by the sea. I knew I would be seeing many old friends for the first time since my stroke, and I would probably meet new people. I grew increasingly uncomfortable due to my inner desire to look normal in front of everyone who would be at the party. There were many beautiful villas in Ibiza, but Paul's was extra special and luxurious. It had 2 swimming pools. One was an infinity pool with the sea view, a professional gym, cinema, fortified safe room, about 10 bedrooms, and a 200 square meter living room with a 240-degree view of the sea beyond. Paul occasionally rented the entire property out to a variety of people. These included Barcelona footballers like Messi and Fabregas, and sheikhs from the United Arab Emirates. The sheikhs had their Ferraris flown into the island by helicopter. The setting was perfect, the organization superb, and the host was a member of the family. Why was I so anxious and uncomfortable? The answer consisted of 2 short words: my ego. I wanted to show off. Here I am, a year and a few months after my stroke, and now look at me. That attitude turned the party into a disaster for me. As people came up behind me not knowing I'd had a stroke, they would begin to chat or ask me a question. I tried to respond, "I've had a stroke and I can't speak fluently yet," but hardly anything came out. I was simultaneously sad and furious with myself for being in that position. One evening, I even squeezed myself into a red dress and put low heels on. It had only been 4 months since I took off my brace and threw my cane in Hawaii. In regular daytime clothing and shoes, I still could barely walk. I definitely couldn't walk in medium-height heels. Alarmingly, I stumbled and fell from the stairs onto the terrace next to the house. I was lucky not to severely injure myself. I was embarrassed. When I think back on it now, perhaps things would have been different if I had already read Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. Our second and much happier trip was to the US, to drop off our son Martin in Cambridge, Massachusetts, so he could begin his first year at Harvard University. We timed our arrival for a week before Martin needed to start his classes. All 5 of us would fly over and take a road trip through New England together. When we reached Bar Harbor, Maine, we relaxed at the waterside and watched the small fishing boats bringing the lobster catch. My favorite meal was soft-shell lobster, native to the area, which is more tender and sweet-tasting than hard-shell lobster. We returned to Boston and Cambridge after that week in the sun with family. I had always loved that part of New England, especially the area around Harvard. Remco and I were both impressed by Martin for being admitted to that prestigious university. Less than 5% who apply to Harvard are accepted, so we were very proud of Martin. Could we afford the nearly $70,000 per year for the following 4 years? Usually the answer would have been no. But we discovered it was possible, and I'll tell you why. As Harvard explains on their website, 70% of their students receive some sort of financial aid. 100% of Harvard students graduate debt-free, and 20% of families from the lowest income bracket pay nothing at all towards their children's education, housing, and food costs. Harvard's philosophy of nurturing their students involves intentionally selecting the brightest minds, the ones with demonstrable leadership potential. They are admitted unconditionally whether they can afford tuition or not. How can Harvard afford to do this? The funds come from the endowments made by former students, influential business people, corporations, and those who wish to encourage excellence in the lives of students without the funds necessary to gain access to such an influential university. When those funds are invested, the interest created allows for a generous scholarship program. Harvard is not only the wealthiest university in the world, it's also affordable to any family who has a bright child with leadership qualities. They have the largest endowment in the world and the most extensive academic library in the world, with 60 miles of shelving. Harvard has also produced 8 US presidents and 158 Nobel laureates. Martin was welcomed warmly by the other international students and Dean Rakesh Khurana. They clapped for Martin as he walked onto the premises, and it was a lovely, movie-like scene. A few days later, we helped Martin get settled into his dorm. While shopping at Target, we bought him a mini fridge and some other feel-at-home stuff. It was exactly the same day former President Obama helped his daughter Malia move into her dorm at Harvard. He humorously describes his feelings about it in an interview with David Letterman on Netflix. 2 days after that, it was time for us to return home. Saying goodbye to Martin was difficult, and we all hugged him with tears in our eyes. A mixture of dismay and pride. We were dealing with emotions that we knew most parents encountered. We left him behind on the other side of the ocean, our first child to leave the nest. As we walked off the campus for the last time, I looked over my shoulder for a while. Martin was beaming. He'll be all right, I thought with a smile. Chapter 22. The Functional Neurologist Who Didn't Want to See Me. That's what I need, I thought. I had been watching videos on YouTube about how to reduce the stiffness in my shoulder. Stiffness I believed was due to the lack of movement. Whether it was wise or not, I was drawing my own conclusions about the need for a chiropractor to adjust my shoulder and neck, increase the blood flow in those areas, and create a healing form of inflammation. A high-velocity, low-amplitude adjustment consisted of a fast stretch that caused relaxation in the muscles and the tissue around the joint that was being manipulated. It also created more freedom of movement, more stability, and a reduction in discomfort due to the improved feedback from the central nervous system and spinal cord. Perhaps the most important effect was an enhanced signal to the central nervous system and brain, as well as a stimulation of the cerebellum and higher cortical centers in the prefrontal cortex, the most human part of the brain, located in the front of the head. Maybe I was wrong to be impatient, but I felt like I was responsible for creating my recovery all alone. I was fed up with the negative attitudes and limited knowledge about essential topics like neuroplasticity that I encountered in some of the doctors and therapists I met so far. And I was tired of wasting my time by visiting less knowledgeable sources. So, I decided to be bold. I wrote an email and sent it out to 15 chiropractors in the Netherlands. It said something like, "Hi, I'm Linda, and I need someone to adjust my neck and help me with some other exercises. I'm recovering from a stroke right now, and I have aphasia. By the way, I'm going for a full recovery. I need a chiropractor that also knows about the brain. If you don't know what neuroplasticity is, don't answer this email." It was a daring and somewhat confrontational email, but it succeeded. From 15 email requests, I only received 4 responses. 3 of them were not the right sort of answer, but one of them chose to refer me to a specific person, Arjun Coopers. His name wasn't on my list, but I sent him the same email I sent the others. Then, I did a web search on his name and discovered that he was not only a chiropractor, but a functional neurologist as well. I found some of his videos on YouTube and learned that he had written 2 books, Help, My Child Has ADHD Autism, and The Single Most Overlooked Problem in Back Patients. When I decided to find out the difference between a functional neurologist and a conventional medical neurologist, I discovered it lies primarily in their approaches to treatment. A conventional medical neurologist typically focuses on the diagnosis of anatomical pathology and the application of pharmaceutical and surgical interventions to treat disease. A functional neurologist views the nervous system as a moldable, changeable entity that can be affected in its function through different types of environmental stimulation. Neuroplasticity was the very core of a functional neurologist's clinical methodology. Wow. He had passed the initial test. I was going to be his patient, period. Or was I? In a conversation I had later with Arjun, he told me that he had been concerned about the wording in my blunt email, stating that I was going for a full recovery. Fortunately for me, he was somewhat curious about me and agreed to an appointment. We've laughed many times about that awkward beginning to our friendship. While driving to his office in Zutphen, I imagined what he would be like in person. From watching his videos, I expected a sympathetic person. The office was quite busy, and he walked by while I was talking to the receptionist. "I know you," he said. "Really?" I wondered. "How does he know me?" "Room number 1, he said. He came into the room, and after talking to him for a short period, I knew immediately that my intuition had been correct. He was kind and understanding. I couldn't say very much at the time because of my aphasia, but he was patient with me. When he found out that I was Swedish, he started speaking to me in Norwegian. I was stunned and raised my eyebrows. He explained that his fiancée was Norwegian. "Okay," I said. "Now I'm going to do some tests on you," he said. It may be easier for me to turn this over to Arjun to explain the tests he did. So Arjun's story of our first meeting follows below. "Well, at least your aphasia is not as bad as I thought," was the first thing that came to mind when I heard her make reasonable conversation with the receptionist. Linda had made it clear beforehand that we should contact her by email and not by phone because of her impaired speech. I later found out that she had been practicing her speech for several hours every day, first thing in the morning, which had greatly improved her ability to speak. After talking with Linda for some time, going through her history and asking what she had done so far to gain back lost function, it became evident that she was both highly intelligent and had done what almost no patient had ever done. She had taught herself more about the brain and neuroplasticity than most doctors and other healthcare providers knew. Also, she had gone all out in her efforts to recover from her stroke and wasn't setting for the limit set by healthcare providers on the time frame within which recovery should take place. The testing on Linda's first visit included a lot of standard medical and neurological testing, as well as more specialized functional neurological testing to assess the status of her brain and nervous system. This included testing balance, coordination, sensation, strength, and the function of the nerves that emerge through the skull, cranial nerves, especially eye functionality, which tells a lot about the different networks and areas in the brain. I also examined her spinal and postural stability to find out what could be done for her left shoulder and upper back. It became evident that her shoulder, neck, and upper back discomfort was a direct effect of abnormal posturing caused by the stroke. Shoulder, neck, and upper back discomfort is often seen after a stroke of the middle cerebral artery, with resultant spasticity and loss of function in the right or left arm. Otherwise, Linda was in good condition, and it showed that she had been training a lot to improve her spinal stability. During the testing of Linda's eye functionality, how the brain directs the eyes, something remarkable happened. For this test, Linda sat on a high swivel chair. She wore a pair of infrared goggles that enabled me to see what happened with her eyes while spinning her to the right and left. She was sitting in the dark and unable to fixate with her eyes. This is called vestibular ocular reflex testing and assesses different parts of the brainstem and cerebellum, little brain. In one part, we tested what happens to the eyes when the spinning stops. Typically, a counter movement is seen in the eyes, which should be equal on both sides. While I was talking to Linda through the testing procedure and asking her what she was experiencing, her voice suddenly stopped mid-sentence. It looked like she was unable to speak for 5 to 10 seconds after the first round of spinning had stopped. The post-rotation effect seemed to disrupt the coordination of her speech, indicating that integration at the brainstem level was not optimal. This part of the brainstem also plays a vital role in inhibiting or suppressing spasms and lowering too high muscle tone in the flexor, bending muscles of her arm and wrist. The initial testing showed that although Linda had suffered a major stroke, there was a lot to work with. Major parts of the networks connecting the damaged higher brain centers, outer cortex deep nuclei, to the brainstem and the cerebellum were still intact and could be used in regaining function. Other than that, Linda had been taking good care of her brain, psychologically, sleep-wise, and through nutrition and exercise. Feeling relieved by that first encounter, I was also intrigued. I had so many questions. Even though I had a basic level of knowledge, I immediately wanted to know more about the specifics, such as why I continued to be so spastic in my arm and hand. It was clear that Arjun was rushed for time in his busy practice, so I decided to try another approach. Sending him an email, I wrote, "Hello Arjun, I've been watching a few of your videos on YouTube, and I'm impressed with your knowledge. Maybe you could have coffee with me sometime after work since the limited time we have in your office is not enough for my questions. Best regards, Linda." I got a positive response, and a few weeks later we met for tea. Finding a way to get around my lack of ability to speak in long or complicated sentences, I would write something on my phone and then hand it to him to read. I also had a few long questions prepared beforehand. For example, sometime after my stroke, I got immense neuropathic pain. It was not like that at the beginning after my stroke, but it got gradually worse. None of the medicines worked. One of the medicines got me down from levels 8 to 9 to 5 to 6, but it affected my REM sleep and made me drowsy. At one point, I hadn't slept in 3 nights, and because the pain was so bad, I wanted to kill myself. Then my son ordered a book called Neuroplastic Transformation by Michael Moskowitz. That was also when I learned about Norman Doidge's books. It took me 3.5 months to get the pain down from a 9 to a 0, with hard work. But I know from my own experience that neuroplasticity works. Now I have a question for you. My biggest problem is the spasticity in my arm. Where does spasticity come from in the brain? I know it originates from a damaged motor cortex in the brain and is taken over by the spine. And in my theory, the amygdala has something to do with this. If I understand better how spasticity works, then I can design a method to reprogram the brain. Where does the process, "I am going to move my left arm," come from? Where does the hypertonia come from? You said back and forth talking between the brain's hand and arm homunculus, thalamus, and cortex before action is put out to the muscles, the so-called efference copy that takes place in the cortico-ponto-cerebello-thalamocortical loops. Is it this movement that brings spasticity, hypertonia, the wrong signal, down to the cerebellum and brainstem and eventually the spine? I guess what I would like to know is, where does the wrong hypertension signal occur? I was thinking about breaking my right arm. I thought, I should do that to give the left arm a signal. You've got to go to work now, based on Taub's CI therapy. Waiting to see what would happen after I handed my phone to him, I was a little nervous about his possible reaction. Is he going to think I'm some kind of stroke nut who is a bit mentally unstable? Is he going to laugh in my face at my crazy ideas? He didn't say a word, at first. Instead, he grabbed the notepad and pen I brought with me and started drawing. As he drew, he explained spasticity and the nervous system. This is what he said. Basically, what happens when a signal is sent out from the outer layers of the brain to move muscles in your arm, corticospinal and rubrospinal activation through the pyramidal tracts, a second signal is sent through different tracts, the extrapyramidal tracts. This is to make sure that there is a balancing act taking place where the muscles are activated. The second signal makes sure that the flexor tone is kept under control. This is important because there are very strong reflexes at the spinal level, which unchecked cause the flexor, or bending, muscles to take over. This results in, for example, an inward rotation of the shoulder and a bent arm. Because both of these tracts were damaged during the stroke, the result is spasticity of the arm and a spastic posture of the affected arm because of the strong spinal reflexes that are not under control anymore. There are, however, strong influences from the brainstem, reticular formation, groups of the nerve cells in the brainstem, and from the cerebellum that have regulatory effect as well, through the vestibulospinal and reticulospinal tracts. In your case, these tracts are still intact but dysfunctional because of the scrambled and lost signal from the damaged brain parts. This is also the area that made your voice disappear for a moment after the spinning during your testing. Then, in a second drawing, he explained why I shouldn't ever break my right arm. This is what he said about that. That is not what you are going to do, and I'm not even going to go into that other than I understand why you're saying it. First of all, you can get complications from that fracture. You do not want to change the right arm's representation in the left brain. Even if it is suppressing the function of the counterparts on the right side, it is also keeping what remains on the right side healthy by doing so. Although inhibition of the remaining neurons in the arm or leg parts of your right hemisphere causes those neurons to remain silent, this signal also promotes protein formation in the same neurons, even if they cannot function, thus keeping them alive. You can use a brace to do the same thing, also for the leg if necessary. The left brain sends a strong signal to the brainstem reticular formation that you need to regulate basic muscle tone on the same left side, as well as calm down overactive nerve cells that cause spasticity. So, you do not want to decrease your left brain's function. Arm function on the right side, when used in exercises, can calm down the increased flexor tone in the left arm. Enough about that. Don't do it. There are other ways to regain function in your left arm. Later, Arjun filmed the video and made a drawing that explained how spasticity works in my case. I was fascinated by his ability to speak normally about science stuff in a way that I or anyone else could understand it. We also shared many of the same interests, including in-depth studies of the brain, nutrition, lifestyle, exercise, and how they were all related. Now, after 2 years have passed, I can honestly say that he became and still is my best friend.